Hi everyone, and welcome back to this series called the Unlast Days of Jesus, a video series. And I'm hoping in the series to uncover some of the story of Jesus' last week before his death, and including up to his death and what happened afterwards. So this is video number 6, the Unlast Days of Jesus. My name is Michael Venema. Welcome, and thanks for joining in. So the story of Jesus' last week that we're following is Mark's version. There are 4 versions of Jesus' life in the Bible, and we're looking at Mark's version, and the account of his last week begins at chapter 11 and finishes up in chapter 15. So we're kind of about maybe roughly a half to 2/3 of the way through that. I first thought the series was going to be fairly quick to do, but it's taken a little bit of work and there are some delays. So I think overall the series is going to be very nice when it's all done. So again, thanks for joining in. So we're going to start with a little bit of an overview of where the story has taken us so far. So I'm beginning at the opening of chapter 11, and this will take us up to about most of the way through chapter 14, and then we're going to dive into the new material for this video. So beginning at chapter 11, Jesus enters Jerusalem, and he enters Jerusalem riding on a colt. And by this action, Jesus is dramatically living out a prophecy from the Jewish scriptures, the Jewish Bible, the pre-Jesus parts of the Bible, where it says that the leader, God's chosen leader for the people, will come into the city, into Jerusalem, not on a horse, a symbol of power and war, but on a colt, humbly. He's still great, but he's going to come in humbly. Then, as chapter 11 moves on, we get to the story of what's called the cursing of the fig tree. And as I sometimes like to say, it wasn't that Jesus was having a bad day and that he was discouraged that the tree had no fruit on it, but the cursing of the tree and its withering was Jesus' way of illustrating that the temple-based Jewish faith and traditions was coming to an end. It no longer had anything of health, of value to give to the people. So there's a suggestion here of the confrontation between Jesus and the powerful temple-based Jewish faith traditions, which dominated Jewish life at the time of Jesus. The chapter moves on. At the end of it, Jesus outsmarts his opponents in an argument. I think it kind of stung them, and also did not endear Jesus to his opponents, who by now were very much looking for a way to do away with Jesus, to put an end to him, because he threatened what they thought was the correct interpretation of the Jewish faith. There are also some political dimensions for wanting Jesus out of the way, and maybe we'll touch on some of those before this video is over. We get to chapter 12, and Jesus tells the story of a vineyard where the vineyard owner sends some of his servants to check out the vineyard. They are beaten and sent away. Finally, the owner sends his son. The son is killed. So here Jesus is, by way of the story, condemning the Jewish leadership, who had a tradition of treating God's prophets quite poorly. And since they were plotting to kill Jesus, Jesus' suggestion that the vineyard owner's son will be killed is a suggestion that they will be the ones killing him and that they will be successful at it. But it's also a way of condemning their action. The vineyard in the pre-Jesus parts of the Bible in the Old Testament is a frequent symbol for God's nation, the Jewish people, the nation of Israel. So then, as chapter 12 unfolds, Jesus takes care of a number of issues. Should the Jewish people pay taxes to the Roman authorities? What about the resurrection of the body? Is that a real thing? There was a debate about which is the greatest of the commandments. And Jesus takes care of some of those questions. There was also a riddle about the Messiah, and Jesus brings this riddle to the fore, and he's really asking the people, think about this people. And this is also one of the ways that Jesus taught, getting people to think about things and draw conclusions based on what they were seeing or would eventually see. And also at the very end of the chapter, there's a story of a reversal of fortunes. The rich Jewish leaders, well-positioned, well-moneyed, well-placed, and the poor, faithful, their positions will be reversed. The poor, faithful will be elevated by God, and not so much the wealthy leadership that's trying to do away with Jesus. Chapter 13, we get to, there's a lot of symbolic things going on there, what some people like to call apocalyptic images. So dangerous times are ahead. The world is going to be turned upside down. Jesus says, don't run after this or that leader, but stay faithful to me and to my teachings. Jesus says, sky and earth, heaven and earth will pass away, but my teachings will remain, will stand forever. So build your life on them. So chapter 14, we get to the story of Jesus being anointed. That is oil poured on him. And this is an allusion to the fact that Jesus will be buried, and Jewish burial meant that the body would have oil poured on the body as part of the honoring of the body in Jewish burial. Also, there's the last Passover with the disciples. Jesus transforms the meaning of the Passover into what we typically know as the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist today. Also, this is a way of Jesus revealing that his death is coming. Peter blurts out that he will stay with Jesus no matter what, even if he has to die for Jesus. And Jesus says to Peter, Peter, you can say these things, but be aware that before this night is over, before the rooster crows twice in the morning, you will have denied me 3 times. At the end of chapter 14, Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's praying a desperate prayer. The enemies are closing in, and exhaustion has taken over the disciples. And that's where we ended last time. And so in the Garden of Gethsemane, it's nighttime, and Jesus is, there's a squadron of armed men coming to arrest him. So I'm going to read some of this and make some comments. And this is our beginning of our new material here. So Judas, one of the 12, showed up with a gang of ruffians, and he had made a signal with the gang, which meant that not all of them knew who Jesus was. Some maybe had not seen him, but many might have. Anyway, and these are armed people, and they are coming partly with the approval of the Jewish religious leaders, of the authorities. And so Judas kisses Jesus. That's the signal, and the armed folks are there to grab Jesus, rough him up a little bit, and things are very tense. One of the followers of Jesus pulls out a sword and brings it down on one of the servants of the Jewish priest, lopping off the man's ear. Anyway, Jesus, in his typical, very collected way, says, "What's all this coming after me with swords? Wasn't I out in the open all the time? And yet you never came after me then. Why are you coming to me at night armed?" And then Jesus ends up saying to them, he says, "What you're really doing is you're confirming all of the prophetic writings. Now here Jesus is talking about, again, the Jewish writings, the pre-Jesus parts of the Bible. What exactly could he be referring to? Well, he could be, and I'm certain that he was referring to things like Isaiah chapter 53, where we have God's suffering servant, and it says, he has poured out his life unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. So Jesus says, or so God's suffering servant is lumped in with sinners and people who transgress God's ways. So, and this, of course, is what the Jewish leadership is doing to Jesus. They're lumping him in with transgressors who deserve to be arrested and dealt with very harshly. So Isaiah 53 for sure. Also Zechariah 13. And I've just got a bit of it here that I want to read. And on the big day of God, the lying prophets will be publicly exposed and humiliated, and no more masquerading in prophet clothes. And the idea here is that what's going to happen now is that Jesus' truthfulness, his stature, will continue to hold him together, while the leadership, so to speak, the prophets and so on, are going to be the ones who are actually committing a crime, in that they have conspired to do away with Jesus, and they will succeed in having him killed. So in all of this, the corruption of the leadership will be revealed. Also, continuing on with Zechariah 13, sword, get moving against my shepherd, against my close associate. This is God's voice. And so what it suggests is that God is going to be the one who cuts down his own chosen leader. Kind of we'll get into some of that a bit later, but this is what's starting to happen. There is a movement against God's chosen leader, Jesus, and it's not just people. It's also God has a strong, the dominant hand in this. And it talks about the killing of the shepherd and the scattering of the sheep. Well, what's going to happen here? The sheep absolutely are being scattered. When Jesus is picked up, all of his disciples run for it. Even one of the more or less innocent bystanders. We read, a young man was following along. He had on a bedsheet. Some of the armed men grabbed him, but he got away running naked, leaving them holding the sheet. So even the bystanders are in danger of being caught up in the malice and the violence that is starting to unfold. So the sheep are being scattered. Jesus is left alone. He's the shepherd, and the sword is going to move against him. So Jesus is saying that the scriptures, many other passages too in the Bible, are all bearing down on this point in time, the arrest of Jesus and what's going to happen after this. So we get to the next section, and there we have Jesus. He's brought to trial by the Jewish authorities. Jesus was led to the chief priest, where the high priests, religious leaders, and scholars had gathered together. Peter, right, followed at a safe distance until they got to the chief priest's courtyard, where Peter mingled with the servants and warmed himself at the fire. Now, a couple things are going to happen here. The religious authorities have rounded up a bunch of people who are willing to say all kinds of negative things about Jesus. They're not particularly true. In fact, it's not the truth of the charges that the court is after, but it's finding some kind of a narrative, some kind of an accusation that in some way might stick, so they condemn him to death. So they've got a few things here. I'm going to just read a bit here from this version. Then a few of these people. Well, I'll back up a little bit. They found nothing. Plenty of people were willing to bring in false charges, but nothing added up, and they ended up canceling each other out. And then a few of them stood up and lied. We heard him say, I'm going to tear down this temple built by hand labor, and in 3 days rebuild it without lifting a hand. But even then, they couldn't exactly agree. Now, if you know some of the background to this, you know that Jesus does say something like this, and you can see this in John chapter 2 and Mark 13. But they get it all messed up and mangled, so even then they couldn't agree exactly. And in the middle of all this, the chief priest stands up and asks Jesus, what do you have to say to these accusations? Because, you know, Jesus, you're in a lot of trouble. Things are mounting up against you. If there's any truth to these accusations, or if they're more or less true, you could be executed. Jesus was silent, saying nothing. The chief priest tried again, and this time he says, are you the Messiah? That is, the chosen leader for God's people, the Son of the Blessed. Jesus says, yes, I am. You'll see it yourself. Well, this is not the kind of thing that Jesus should be saying if he wants to get off the hook. But he goes on. He says, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Mighty One, arriving on the clouds of heaven. The chief priest lost his temper. We're going to get back to those few lines in a second. The chief priest lost his temper. Ripping his clothes, he yelled, did you hear that? After that, do we need witnesses? You heard the blasphemy. Are you going to stand for it? In other words, the presider over the trial is saying, hey, we don't even need any more witnesses. We've already heard this man Jesus taking upon himself a kind of a stature and a role as if he's the blessed one of God, the chosen leader, taking on this kind of role for himself. It's blasphemous. We're not going to stand for it. They condemned him, one and all. The sentence, death. Some of them started spitting at him. They blindfolded his eyes, then hit him, saying, who hit you? Prophesy. And the guards, punching and slapping, took him away. So you can kind of see, get a sense for the level of tension and boiling over hatred for Jesus, even disgust for all the things that he's been doing. Now, I said we'd get back to this line about the Son of Man seated at the right hand of the Mighty One, arriving on the clouds of heaven. So I want to read a bit there, because what I want to read from is Daniel chapter 7. I'm just going to bring it up here for myself so I can read it. So here's Daniel earlier on in the Bible. This is part of his vision. Thrones were set in place. The Ancient One sat down. His robes were white as snow. His hair was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, its wheels blazing. A river of fire poured out of the throne. Thousands upon thousands served him. Tens of thousands attended him. The courtroom was called to order. The books were opened. So it's the time of God's truth, of God's justice and judgment coming forward. I, Daniel, kept watching. The little horn was speaking arrogantly. This is a reference to an earlier part of the story where part of the government of the world speaking very arrogantly, and then as I watched, and also making life very, very difficult and deadly for God's people. Then as I watched, the monster was killed, its body cremated in a roaring fire. These are all symbols of the animosity and hatred for the people of God that does, spring up from time to time, and especially for the Jewish people many, many years ago, in the time of Daniel especially. The other animals lived on for a limited time, but they didn't really do anything, had no power to rule. I'm going to skip over that for a bit. My dream continued, and here's the very interesting part. I saw a human form, like a son of man, arriving in a whirl of clouds. He came to the Ancient of Days and was presented to him. He was given power to rule, all the glory of royalty. Everyone, race, color, and creed had to serve him. His rule would be forever, never ending. His kingly rule never be replaced. So the Son of Man is this figure. This is Jesus's favorite way of referring to himself, and it requires a bit of thinking to sort out what he's trying to say, but not a whole lot because it's there in Daniel. So what Jesus is suggesting at his trial is that he is this being who's going to be seated at the right hand of God and share in God's authority to judge all the world, to share in God's authority of ruling all the world. So you can see why this would be particularly not just new and shocking, but even very offensive to the Jewish leadership, who would not take kindly to people making careless claims about who they were and saying that they were, in a sense, equal with God, that is, sharing in God's authority. So you might say that at this point, Jesus' fate is sealed, which it is. We're going to get into chapter 15 next video. At the end of 14, remember how I mentioned that Jesus had said to Peter, before this night is over, before the rooster crows twice in the morning, you will have denied me 3 times. End of chapter 14. The story is there of Peter being with the kind of restless crowds hanging around while Jesus is being interrogated, and him being asked 3 times, hey, aren't you one of the people who was with Jesus? And Peter vehemently, even swearing, denies it. The rooster crows twice. So Jesus' fate is sealed. His friends have vanished, fled, and even his most enthusiastic follower, Peter, has abandoned him. So next video, number 7, we will get to chapter 15, and after that we're at the very last chapter of Mark, and the last video of the series. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Thanks again so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share, and hit the notification bell so that you will know about new videos coming out. See you next time.